It literally felt like we were in like Dante's Inferno. It was 10, 11 a.m. and the nighttime lights were turning on because it was red and thick with smoke. Like birds were dropping out of the sky. My name's Annabel. My experience with fire is growing up in rural Australia, had really intense bushfires that swept the east coast, and we had to evacuate where I grew up. And I just moved back to Australia. It was just before COVID hit. To get to the farm, it's like a 40-minute, 30-minute drive through thick bush. If we'd left like 10 minutes later, we would have been locked in. My dad stayed behind because he wanted to look after the animals in the house. Never seen people drive quicker. The wind from the bushfires was, picking up the fire trucks, which weigh 1.1 or 2 tons, and whipping them over. It's not just the fire itself. It literally, it takes all the oxygen out of the air. You'd go past and there'd be a caravan up in a tree, like 3 meters up. But a lot of the town got destroyed. But the community help was amazing. Government did do shit all though. The government was the worst thing. They didn't send help because it was a voting sector that didn't vote for the government. So they kind of basically cut off funding. It took them 2 weeks to send in the Navy. I went into kind of this deep research mode and understanding of Indigenous knowledge systems and land management through fire. And I remember I was speaking to someone and he was like, he works up north, so works in Arnhem Land, and he was talking about it. He's like, if you ever watch the fire and the way that it is managed, in a sense, it's almost like it's otherworldly. It's like a relationship. The fire is alive, there's this dynamic, and in that way, especially the Indigenous Australians are able to cultivate the land in a way that is regenerative, because the Australian government at the time really neglected Indigenous knowledge systems. It meant that there was a mismanagement, and we had the worst bushfires in over 100 years, which stripped most of the eastern parts of Australia. But crazy. And then I left because I was like, I'm done with natural disasters. I've had my fair share.
So IS post some video of shooting people to death, and they make it really slow, so you can see how people really dying. And that's the first time I saw how people really die because of bullet and the gunshot, and in a really slow speed. People's hair really like a watermelon. That's really the first thing in my mind, because you can see boom, like that. One day I was in the studio and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna design some hat piece. What kind of hat piece should I design? And this coming to my mind. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm just gonna make a spiral like this just to represent this is a bullet. And my feeling, I really think it starts from 2019, the COVID time. Every day you walk on the street and you see so many masks, like medical masks. And it's also really interesting to me because they are the color of the sky blue, but it's artificial. And every day, even no matter it's in China or it's in UK, every day you see so many, and you feel like our world is surrounded by this artificial sky blue. And it's supposed to represent calm, hygiene, and love and peace, but it's actually something we wear to protect ourselves and try to keep distance with each other. The color of the sky blue, the blue things, you can change and switch the meaning of it. I feel like deep down in my heart, I'm really violent. I don't know why. And also about this collection, I feel it's really violence. It's really that kind of the condense of anger, but it's at the surface it's really calm. It's really chill, but inside it's really intense, that kind of feeling.
I'm a fire sign, so people I think tend to call me that I'm quite fiery in a way, because I'm double Aries. My name is Danae, and I am in a really nice studio. My intention is to have fun, enjoy what I do as long as I'm doing it. I enjoy the process of making more than the piece itself. I get to think so many things while I'm doing it, and like there's one thing here and one thing here, and almost debunk while I'm making it. I remember there was Marvourneen, she's a writer, and she says that for her writing helped her so much because like she gets to take all of the aspects of her life, and the writing itself is like she puts it in a bowl. I notice my own disposition and personality coming across in the things I do, which are quite chaotic. But also I almost allow it. It's like if there's some chaos and some like maybe ugliness, letting the ugliness be there, letting that be that.
It sort of seeks out people who need that sort of community. So with the Messianic cult in particular, it was a lot of people who had moved to New York, my parents included, who were desperate to sort of find community. They thought like the best way to do that was to join a church and to have like this sort of community, and they just ended up falling into something that spiraled, which I think can happen with fandom as well. Growing up, I was in a Messianic Jewish religious cult. The whole school that I went to was based in this church, and we all had class every day together, no matter sort of what age you were. So I was in a group of 3 girls who were my age, and one of them was my best friend. And I was sleeping over at her house one night, and her mom comes in and says that our school had just burned down and the church had just burned down. And I remember having a few thoughts, one being that I had just drawn a really great drawing of a puffin and that I would never see it again. I never did. I also remember feeling very relieved at the time, and I couldn't really quite figure out why. Then 10 years later, in 2018, I was looking at the news and I saw that the church had burned down a second time, exactly 10 years later, in what the article called a version of God's wrath. I sort of dip my toe every so often into things from my childhood, and then I have to dip it back out, because I think if I start making too many pieces about it, I get really wrapped into something that it then consumes me. So even while making this, I had to sort of make pieces about living in London now, or, you know, what it means to send nudes online, you know, like all these like things where I had to sort of like reemerge and be like, okay, let's do something about like what I'm feeling currently, and then we'll go back into this childhood. When I was finished, I was thinking about sort of what it is, if it's sort of like me trying to like come to terms with this thing that had happened in my childhood, or if it was something to look back on, which I think I decided that was what it was in the end, like some memorial to it. My girl blog, my blog entry.
We watch an identity come in, we perform that identity, and then we let it go. And then we watch the other identity come in, we perform that identity, and we let it go. Our name is Ekabo Donyi. We're in London, trying to become non-human. We're already there. On our way to check the Himalayas, this was when we were about 18 years old or so. So we were on a bus that was going in the mountains, and we were stopped by this man. Essentially was covered in white ash and was holding a human skull, and then he asked for 2 rupees, and everyone in the bus was scrambling to try and find 2 rupees. Couldn't find 2 rupees. We had 10 rupees, so we gave him 10 rupees, and he said, I'm not going to take that. I require 2 rupees. And so it was a weird situation, and so we tried, and eventually someone found a 2 rupee coin, and so we gave it to him. That was our first encounter with the Agori. They're a tribe of cannibals in India that worship the god of destruction, Shiva. They live off the waste of the world as a way to kind of pay respect to their deity of destruction. The whole idea of being a Agori comes from the fact that they are from the lowest caste in the Hindu caste system. We do want to say that the Agori are actually not only these individuals that are cannibals, right? They're also other people from that lowest caste who are marginalized as well. And in many ways, they have kind of taken control, and letting go of contemporary systems of governance, like they live outside all of that. But we're really interested in this kind of idea of this large group of people who reimagined it to a point where they completely broke off from the rest of the people around them.
Like all these spring petals, they bloom, they're beautiful for a week or so, and then they know they're going to die because they know they'll come back again. And I think that's quite an important part of really living as a person, is accepting, all your beliefs could just disappear at one moment and they could be reborn as something else. I've always found myself as more of a vessel. I think a lot of the interest of my life comes from the people I surround myself with. My practice sort of is looking at the space in between time, these sort of infinite moments that we can't judge, or there's no tangible action to it, but there's sort of the space that defines everything that we do. It defines all our tangible things, and for me, it's a space where we can sort of find space for community, find space for revolution, and find space to sort of actually be ourselves rather than a self that is within this institution or within something that might use you. The piece is a cross, and it talks about the impositions we've had as a species, as a community, as any sort of thing. And it talks about how we've sort of become machines for these institutions. And it has a perpetual repeating motion of a clack. And that sort of goes on throughout the whole performance of the piece. And that in itself is hoping to bring the audience to an exteriority of sort of the existence of, the white space you're in or whatever environment you're in.
At night, the devil would turn himself into the attractive form of a beautiful woman, omitting no detail that might provoke lascivious thoughts. But Anthony called to mind the fiery punishment of hell and the torment inflicted by worms. In this way, he resisted the onslaught of lust. The devil, without hesitation, set before him the slippery path of youth that leads to disaster. But Anthony concentrated on the everlasting torments of future judgment and kept his soul's purity untainted throughout these temptations. I found this manuscript called In Praise of the Holy Cross, and every page of the manuscript is gridded, and it looks like almost like a word search with like a very simple image in the center of the page, or there's some with like angels. I find an image that I like. That becomes the basis for the beginning of a painting. But then I always find any meaning behind the painting always comes later. You do something without much intention behind it other than like just aesthetic or whatever, but then later on a meaning becomes apparent that wasn't apparent at the time. There was a long period of like sort of a really strong period of atheism. But the last maybe, I don't know how long exactly it's been, but people have become interested in spirituality in general. In a world where we've got so much technology and we've got all these things at our disposal, there's a gap in the market for spirituality to take over in some way. I think people are, in the modern world, seeking out some kind of form of, not necessarily Christianity, but it could be anything.
火焰它是一种非常有灵性的 事物，它最直接的是代表了我内心的一种欲望。欲望它就是我的作品，我觉得不管是我曾经的作品还是我现在的作品，最直接的一个动机。所以说我觉得我的作品本身就是一种火的呈现。我做了一些简单的调研，就是中国的一些巫术系统呢，其实在全世界范围内是有一些共同点的。我主要调研到的有一个叫交感巫术的，它的原理类似于把不同人的一些部分组合在一起，然后通过巫师的一些仪式，可以让这两个主体发生一定的连接。所以我在我的作品中用到了这样的一个基本原理，呈现了很多我的身体部分和另一个他者的身体部分。在今天的中国，它仍然在持续，因为在我出生和成长的那个地方，这些民间的巫术它仍然是起效的，只不过它不在一个更公开、更广泛的社会的语境层面。因为我觉得巫术它是一种作为现代科学之外的额外语言，它仍然在为一些失权者提供一些权利的补偿，所以它在当今的中国，它仍然是非常的，我觉得有效的。火焰在巫术里面，它也有很强的一个很重要的一个寓意，因为在过去的巫术中，火焰它常常是人的世界和鬼魂的世界之间的一种沟通方式。人们通过燃烧很多物件，燃烧成灰烬，可以与中国的鬼界进行沟通。几年前，我的父亲得了一场很重的病，然后我们家就请了一个巫师到家里来，想要去庇佑他。他们当时在我们家的一些角落里面燃烧了我已经去世的爷爷的衣物，试图去召唤他，但是倒不是说要把他的形象给召唤回来，而是希望他在之后的日子里可以帮助我的父亲赶快的恢复健康。
I walked past this chicken shop, there's this sign, and it's actually like, it's a humanoid chicken, and it gives this thumbs up, and it's so demented, because it's like a man-made martyr, and the chicken doesn't want to be a martyr. It's saying like, I approve of you eating my flesh, is like Jesus. My name is Levin. I ate too much fried chicken. It made me feel sick. Once you kind of do something so much, maybe you start to look at the texture and maybe start wondering if there's like more to the thing than just like this practical thing. I got really obsessed, with the texture and kind of the crunchiness of it, the cracks in it, the marks on the surface. I mean, I'm interested in skin and marks on skin and alterations of skin. Maybe at one point that I wish my skin was fried. Yeah, then I just started frying stuff, these like trinkets or artifacts that actually had fried bits in them, and then I just started also frying up the whole thing and kind of burying it, giving it a proper burial. I don't feel transcended. But maybe when I work, it's like almost like going there, but kind of flirting with the idea, but like maybe not fully doing it. But when I leave that, then I get cynical again, because like I'm still a practical person. Like in my daily life, I can be spiritual as an artist without without cringing.
Because it's a very common trauma response, and especially diasporic groups, at this idea that they want to live in the passive existence. They do not want any more trouble. Place is a tricky one. I was born in Odessa, Ukraine, born and raised in a port city, and immigrated to Canada when I was very young. Now I'm here in London, and I often look to mythology as an inspiration to uncover or recover a certain instinct that we have as women to build up and heal our sense of self. There was one particular story about this woman who lived in a village not far from my grandmother. She had these two long, gorgeous braids that went all the way down to her knees. She would wear two of them because in Ukrainian culture, having two braids signified that you were single and not yet married. And her 7 brothers wandered off into the forest and were met with a witch, and they disappeared. She was told to cut off her braids and turn the braids into a portal through which she could jump and rescue her brothers. So it was at the sacrifice of her freedom and her femininity that her family could be reunited. I often always mused to myself what happened to those braids that were discarded and never spoken of again. Did they become part of the soil of that forest? Were they then used as ropes to tie ships into the port? I felt so much anger for her because myself, like many women, had to sacrifice so much to support our families emotionally, to discard a lot of knowledge. And in my imagination, the braids that were discarded began to grow their own leaf and biomass. And they started accumulating and crawling and became creatures of their own. So the work that you see in the show is sort of inspired by that, where these braids, this proof of this female sacrifice, still remain and acquired a life of their own. And in fact, they still remain to be portals and entrances into other dimensions that hold other forms of knowledge and alternative archives.
So there was a time where I made the torch a little bit too big, and I didn't know, and then I just bring it to performance directly. And then the flame ended up to be much bigger than I thought it would be. And then afterwards, when I saw it, like all the hair, like on my hand and stuff is like all burned out. So my name is Finch, and my real name is Huang Lanyun. And I feel like these two names, they represent two different identity almost, and two different practice that I'm doing. What I do is I will use both of my names in one piece of work. So there's one that I'm planning to do. This one will explore the theme of a certain type of fetish and how social structure shapes people and their mind, especially with women. And this one, I use my real name, which is Huang Lanyun, as the artist and the director, and Finch as the performers of the work. I can be the entertainer. I can take the gaze, although it's like a very complex relationship that I have with people looking at me, audience looking at me. So maybe the entertainer type where the audience has control over me, because when I do it, I need to look at their reaction and I need to keep grabbing their attention so that I don't lose them basically. And in the other type where they don't exist, in my opinion.
The righteous anger that produces like a positive rebirth is what I'm kind of interested in. Not the kind of only the destruction, because I think that's a part of it, but it's like, how do we tap into that like positive force that fire brings, you know? My name is Roland Knowlden. I spent the last 7 years in Chicago. I feel like in some ways, every time I make something, it's like this kind of like desire for a change or like a revision or revisiting a thing. My practice started a lot with like maps, and then they slowly became like aerials, like images of these cities that were imagined. And then before I left, they were just like all these images of cities on fire. And I felt like, in a way, it was like an internalized like coping mechanism of like what I was feeling walking through the streets of Chicago. Yeah, there was something about like coming here and trying to understand like, yeah, the history of kind of like race and these conflicts from like a US perspective, and then understanding that internal tension that manifests itself in certain events or like certain happenings in history are like synonymous all around the world. In some ways, if you think about New Cross Fire, like it was a firebombing, like a
racist attack where someone is using fire as a weapon against these people. But then the result of that is the kind of like revolutionary fire, like a kind of like justified anger or like righteous anger, where like the internalized fire is like materialized and then used as like a way to revolt against that same weapon, you know? And so like fire has that revolutionary force, and it shows up like here in the States, in Africa, across the Atlantic, everywhere in the world, kind of all the time.